You've sat alone in a quiet room, completely fine by every measurable standard. No emergency, no crisis, nothing wrong. And still felt this low, heavy ache you couldn't explain to anyone. And the worst part, you tried. You tried to explain it, and the person looked at you like you were speaking a language they'd never heard. That's not weakness. That's not being dramatic. That's something else entirely. And by the end of this, you're going to understand what that something is, maybe for the first time. Because here's what nobody tells you. The people who feel everything too deeply aren't broken. They're wired differently. And that wiring has a history. It has a reason. And it has a cost that most people around you will never fully see. Let's start with something you've probably never heard framed this way. You don't just listen to what people say. You listen to what changed. The tiny shift in someone's tone halfway through a sentence. The pause that came a half second too late. The way someone laughed but their eyes didn't move. Most people hear the words. You hear the gap between the words and the truth. You've always been able to do that. Pick up on something being off before anyone's admitted it, before anyone even knows it themselves. And instead of being seen as the perceptive, emotionally intelligent person that makes you, you've mostly just been called sensitive. Like it's a flaw. Like noticing more is somehow a problem. But here's what's actually happening inside you. Your nervous system is scanning constantly. Not because you're anxious, though sometimes you are, but because early in your life, reading the room wasn't optional. It was survival. You learned to detect emotional weather before the storm hit, and that skill never switched off. Research has shown that highly sensitive people process emotional information at a neurological level that's measurably deeper than the average person. This isn't metaphor. This is brain activity, which means the thing you've been apologizing for your whole life is literally the way your mind works. But here's the part that nobody warns you about. When you're wired to notice everything, you also can't stop noticing. The silence after you said something, the way someone's energy shifted when you walked into the room, the text that came back slightly shorter than usual. Most people would scroll past that. You will sit with it for 3 hours. And that brings us to the thing that's probably caused you more confusion than anything else. Why do small things hit you so hard? Someone gives you a look, just a look, and it lands like a stone dropped in still water. And the ripples don't stop. You replay a conversation from Tuesday on Friday night. You feel secondhand embarrassment so intensely you have to leave the room. A song comes on, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely, feeling something from 4 years ago like it just happened. Other people move on. You absorb. And I want you to really sit with that distinction because it explains so much about your life. It's not that you're dwelling on purpose. It's not that you enjoy the overthinking or the emotional flooding. It's that your brain assigns weight to emotional experiences that other brains let pass through. Your emotional memory is longer, deeper, more textured. Something that barely registered for someone else left a mark on you. And you've spent years wondering if something was wrong with you for that. Nothing was wrong with you. You were just never given the tools to process what you could feel. Think about it this way. Imagine 2 people walking the same path in the rain. One gets a little wet and moves on. The other is soaked to the bone before they even realize the sky changed. Same rain. Completely different experience. That's not about weakness. That's about how much surface area you're walking with. And here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. That depth of feeling. It doesn't just apply to pain. It applies to joy, to beauty, to connection. When you love something, you love it all the way. When you connect with someone, it's real in a way that other people rarely get to feel. The same sensitivity that makes the bad things unbearable is what makes the good things extraordinary. But you probably don't hear that enough. And we need to talk about why. Because this didn't start with you as an adult. This started somewhere much earlier. And this is the part that might actually stop you mid-breath. Think about what it felt like to grow up in your house. Not the version you described to someone at a party. The real version. Was the emotional atmosphere predictable? Or did you learn to read faces before you read books? Did you ever walk into a room and immediately feel the temperature of it, the tension, the silence, the thing that wasn't being said, and quietly recalibrate yourself to survive it? A lot of deeply feeling people grew up in environments where emotions were unpredictable, not necessarily abusive, sometimes just inconsistent. A parent who was warm one day and distant the next. A household where you never quite knew what version of the mood you'd come home to. And so you developed a superpower out of necessity. You learned to scan, to read, to anticipate, to feel the room before the room knew what it was doing. You became emotionally fluent in a language no one taught you. And you did it alone. While everyone around you went about their day, you were running this constant background program, monitoring, adjusting, managing. By the time you were old enough to call it exhausting, it had become so automatic, you didn't even know you were doing it. And here's what that creates. A person who can walk into any room and know within seconds who's hurting, who's pretending, who's about to leave, who's been crying. A person with almost supernatural intuition about people. But also, a person who is quietly, privately, running on fumes. Because that software never gets to shut down. You weren't too sensitive. You were too unsupported. There's a difference. And that difference matters more than I can put into words. Now here's the paradox at the center of all of this. And I want you to sit with the contradiction, because it's real and it's important. The same depth that makes you exhausting to carry, to yourself, is the same depth that makes you irreplaceable to the people who actually know you. Your empathy isn't performance. When someone tells you they're hurting, you don't just understand it intellectually, you feel the shape of it. You know what to say, not because you practiced, but because you've been there. You've lived in feelings that most people only visit. And that makes you the person people call at 2 a.m. The one they trust with the real version of their lives. But here's where it gets complicated. Empathy without boundaries is not a gift. It's a slow drain. And because you feel so much, you've probably spent years giving emotional labor that you never got back. Absorbing other people's stress as if it was your own responsibility to carry it. Taking on moods that weren't yours. Leaving conversations feeling heavier than when you arrived. Not because anything bad happened, but because you processed the entire room while everyone else just talked. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system that was never taught how to filter. And the creativity, God, the creativity, the art, the music, the writing, the ideas that come from people who feel deeply. It's not coincidence. It's direct output. You can't create something that moves people if you don't know how to be moved. The most resonant art, the most honest storytelling, the most quietly devastating music, it almost always comes from someone who felt too much and eventually found a place to put it. But here's what we don't talk about. The cost, the anxiety, the emotional burnout that hits you while everyone else still seems fine, the way you need more recovery time after social situations, the way you sometimes go quiet for days just to refill something that got emptied, the way you've been called too much by people who were simply not enough to hold what you carry. You were never the problem. You were just in rooms too small for the size of what you feel. And so here's the truth, the real one, the one this whole thing has been building toward. You were never too sensitive. You were never too emotional. You were never too much. You were a person with a wide open nervous system who was placed in situations that required you to feel everything, and then handed no tools, no language, no framework for what to do with all of it. And so you did what you always do. You managed, you endured, you felt it all and kept going, quietly convinced that the problem was you. It was never you. The feeling everything, that's not the wound. That was your way of surviving, connecting, creating, loving. The wound was being told it was wrong. The wound was learning to apologize for the most alive thing about you. And here's what I want to leave you with. The goal isn't to feel less. It's to finally feel safely. To stop bracing for the impact of your own emotions. To stop treating your inner life like something that needs to be hidden or managed or shrunk. You don't need to become someone who feels less. You need to become someone who no longer has to survive their own feelings alone. You feel everything deeply. And that is not your flaw. That is your frequency. And somewhere out there, there are people tuned exactly to it, waiting to hear you at full volume. If this hits somewhere real, there's something else you should watch next, about why emotionally intense people struggle with relationships in ways that are specific and fixable. It's the video that makes a lot of this finally make sense. It's right there. Give it a chance.